You're listening to the Matt Lehner podcast. Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed on iTunes so that you can catch every new episode as they get dropped to your feed. While you're at it, make sure you leave your comment to this podcast below so that I can tailor my messages to your requests. And with that, let's get started. You must be the person before you can become the person. You gotta have that mindset of working on your game like your life depends on it, because it does. Your mindset, your perspective, the way you approach setbacks will determine how far you get in this game.
Nice, good. Good move, boy. Hey, boy got NBA moves.
Welcome everyone to the Matt Lehner podcast. We are back after it seems like years since our last episode, but we are officially on iTunes now, so make sure you subscribe. And today I want to talk about dealing with injuries. How do we as basketball players deal with injuries? It's something that unfortunately every player has to deal with at some point in their career. Maybe some injuries more serious than others, some requiring surgery, some requiring some weeks of rehab. But we all deal with injuries. Me personally, early on in my career throughout high school, I've never really had any injuries other than, your minor ankle sprain. But it was usually something that I could just work through, and within a week, 2 weeks, I was perfectly back to normal. But after high school, I had my first major injury. My second year in college, I damaged the PCL in my left knee, the PCL being the posterior cruciate ligament. Your knee has 4 ligaments. The PCL is the one in the back of your knee. I had damaged that, got tripped in practice, slammed my knee on the ground pretty hard, and that was my first experience with an injury. And it left me out for 6 weeks before I was able to get back to playing, and it really took me the rest of that season to actually feel back to normal. And then 4 months after that, I tore the PCL or the ACL in the same knee, as well as my medial and lateral meniscus. Now, this injury required surgery. I had in the May of 2014, and it's been over 2 years now since that. And I also had sprained my right ankle pretty bad, which I didn't really rehab properly. I tried to play through it a couple days after it happened, which was not smart. And it took me, a process of actually learning how to rehab correctly to finally get that feeling close to normal. At the moment, I had sprained my left knee again, like over a week ago. Nothing major, but I'm not able to play or practice at game speed right now, so I'm in the process of trying to rehab properly. And over all these injuries, I've learned how to better rehab and to continue to develop your game when dealing with injuries. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the first point I want to give you when dealing with injuries in basketball is to just let it heal. We want to get back to playing, we want to get back to training, we want to keep improving. But you have to realize when you're first dealing with injuries that in order to improve, you have to be healthy. And in order to be healthy, when you have an injury, you got to let it heal. There's things we can do to speed up the healing process, the recovery process. But usually for the first week, 2 weeks after an injury, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physical therapist, I'm not an athletic trainer. I'm just telling you these things based on my experience. So if you have an injury, make sure you consult a trainer, doctor before taking any action. But I'm going to give you my experience. So usually the first week to 2 weeks after an injury, you want to actually just get off your feet as much as possible. Don't play, don't go to the court, and just let it heal. Now there's some things we can do to speed up the healing process. First one being heat. Using a heating pad, taking a hot bath, hot shower, will flood the area with blood, which will carry nutrients to the injured area to allow it to heal faster. Some trainers talk about icing to reduce inflammation, but from the things I've read, icing just traps the blood in the area And usually after an injury, the blood is filled with I wouldn't call it scar tissue, but bad inflamed tissue. So if you use ice, you are just basically trapping that fluid in the area. So you want to actually get new blood flowing in, which is where the heat comes in. Now this is going to hurt, especially if you're doing, a hot shower or a hot bath. You want to go as hot as you possibly can stand. You want to actually, like we talk about, push your comfort zone. Well, that definitely applies here. It's going to hurt a little bit. You don't have to start off with the hottest temperature possible, but you need to slowly increase it. So it's going to hurt. The area should be coming red because that means blood is flowing into it. So you want to use heat. Another thing you can do is contrast showers. You could do this with heat and ice. You could do this with just a hot cold shower. Now this is, like I said, icing, just plain icing is not something you want to do. But if you use heat and cold alternating, what you're doing is you're bringing in fresh blood, and then you're using the ice, the cold, to remove that blood and then bringing new blood back in. So you're basically flushing, which is what you want to get. You want to get new blood coming in, the old blood with all the bad nutrients out, and bringing in new nutrients in to allow it to heal faster. And dealing with the inflammation, something we can use is compression, using a compression sleeve, wrapping the injured area. Having it compressed really helps relieve the inflammation in the area. So those are 3 things you can use when you have injuries, as well as elevation. You have all heard the RICE principle: rest, ice, compression, elevation. We'll use all of them, but instead of just using the ice component, we'll use heat and ice. So follow those 4 steps with the heat and the ice, and you should do this for about the first week to 2 weeks after an injury. Now, once that is taken care of, while you're doing this at the same time, something you can focus on is focus on your mind. Injuries, sometimes they limit or completely remove the ability for you to do something physical. As athletes, this is something that is devastating for us. We love to be active. We love to get out there and compete. We love to continue to improve and work on our game. But injuries sometimes take this away from us, and we feel depressed, we feel stuck, we feel trapped. It's not a good feeling. But something you can do, like I said, there's an advantage in every setback. There's something you can always do to improve. And when we're in this stage of inactivity, something we can do is focus on our mind. Now, for our purposes as basketball players, this could mean reading books about basketball, reading books about personal development, studying game film, things of that nature, watching videos, listening to podcasts such as this one. These are all things we can do to work on our game, develop our mind, so that when we are able to get back on the court, we're able to get back to playing. We'll be doing so from a higher level of understanding and knowledge, which will greatly, trust me, greatly improve your game and your life. I'm telling you, after my ACL injury and rehab, just all the books I've read, just studying resources, studying game film, watching tons of my old games while I was rehabbing and learning from those games greatly improved my game when I got back on the court. Like, I felt like a completely new person, and it was truly a blessing in disguise. So that's really the mindset, the perspective you have to have when you're dealing with these injuries. You can really focus on your mind in the earlier stages of an injury, and this will probably well make up for any lack of physical ability you have coming back, or the time that it'll take to get back to 100%. You'll be doing so from just a much greater place in your life. So really focus on your mind, focus on things like meditation. There's tons of things out there you can do. If you listen to this podcast, you'll definitely hear a lot of things that you can do to work on your mind. So that's something you need to do. But once we're able to get back on the court, once we're able to not playing at full speed, not practicing at game speed, but able to, do some light running, some light jumping, things of that nature, what you want to do is focus on getting reps. We talk about practicing with game situation drills, game speed drills. Well, this doesn't apply when we're dealing with injuries. When we're first getting back on the court, we're going to spend a lot of our time doing stationary training, things like stationary ball handling, 2-ball drills, form shooting, free throws, just shooting spots, catch and shoot jumpers without even moving, just standing in place. Things that are kind of beginner type training we will focus on when we're first getting back from an injury, because we need to focus on the things we can do, right? We're limited in what we can do. We can't play full speed. We can't do game speed drills, but we can get out on the court and just get reps up. So doing this will be better than doing nothing. It'll be something that'll definitely lift your spirits, getting back on the court and starting to just get up reps, shoot shots, work on your ball handling. It'll definitely lift your spirits. But you need to focus on what you can do. So just get up reps, focus on your mechanics, and just do those things. You might not be able to go at the speed that you want to, but you need to focus on doing what you can. So just get up your reps, work on your ball handling, and again, follow what your physical therapist is telling you to do. Once you're able to progress, then progress. But in the earlier stages, you're really going to have to focus in on your mind. You're going to really have to focus on just getting up reps, light jump rope, things of that nature, things that, aren't the most eye-catching. They're not the most exciting. But what you'll find is when you go back to playing, when you go back to training at game speed, all the time you've spent just doing stationary ball handling, just shooting free throws, just working on your form, just getting up reps with your shot, you'll find that your ability to perform in those game situation drills and your ability to perform during games will greatly improve. It might take a little bit of time to integrate that skill into the game situations, but once you do, you'll find you're performing at a much higher level because of all the foundational training that you were doing. So again, it's not something that you want to necessarily be doing when you're healthy. You don't want to just be focusing on just stationary training, but when we're dealing with injuries, again, we have to change the way we're training. We have to focus on the things we can focus on and spend our time doing those things, changing our perspective, and you will find that your game and your mind greatly improves when you focus on what you can do rather than focusing on what you can't do.